Welcome back to Leadership Live. My name is Steve Lois, and I'm going to be your host again. We've got a special session. I've got a return guest coming back, Jason Leoy from Dawn Brands. Thank you for coming back. Dawn Foods, I'm sorry. Thank you for coming back. The whole purpose behind Leadership Live is to talk about some of the harder conversations around leadership. And we've got an interesting topic today that I get asked about a ton. I'm sure you get asked about a ton. And Jason, you and I have talked about this a number of times. But before we jump into it, for those that have not seen you before, give them a 3-second background about you and your role today.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Jason Leoy. I am from Dawn Foods. I'm the Chief People Officer. I've been with Dawn for, roughly 10 years. I've been in this leadership position for 5 of those 10. I have worked at companies like General Electric, Philips, worked all over the world, lived in multiple places in the United States, and I've had the privilege of working for some very robust organizations when it comes to the notion of leadership development and capability development. But more than that, I've lived most of my career in manufacturing type of environments, and in those environments, you got to see the nuts and bolts of leadership on the front line, so to speak. And that's really what shapes my perspective on leadership and shapes my personality, quite frankly, on
We'll see that.
Yeah, in terms of being a leader, and that's something that I love about where I've come from, and I hope that I can energize people to get into those environments and or just adopt some of those principles.
So let's something that you and I've talked about, and again, I've been asked about this a ton of times, is this topic of accountability.
Right.
And people kind of avoid it, but they're curious about it. And it's probably the number one topic I get asked to talk about or speak about or train about is both this leadership accountability. How do we keep our teams accountable? How do we keep ourselves accountable? And you and I bantered about that a couple of weeks ago at my house, as a matter of fact.
Right.
Before we kind of get into the depth of it, give me your perspective from a leadership side. Now, take your HR hat off for a second, because you're not all HR. You're leader in general, as you said in the opening. Your view of accountability, generally speaking. We'll get started there.
Yeah, I mean, accountability is if you think about all the principles and all the philosophies when it comes to leadership, right? I mean, there's a ton of books around leadership and what do you do around leadership. It really all of it boils down to the simple facets around accountability. And accountability to me is, you're saying what you're going to do, then you do what you say, and there's this notion of the say-do matrix, right? And you have a high say, high do. That's the ultimate in accountability. Yeah. I'm telling you what I'm going to do, either for you, with you, or for the business, and then I go do it, and I'm going to tell you again that I did it, right? And that way you can hold me accountable, right? Promise made, promise kept. You can think about all the different words that are out there now, right? But that's the ultimate in accountability. And if you don't have that basic foundational element within you as a leader, then you can't do anything else as a leader, right?
So I bet more than likely everybody who's watching you would probably agree with that definition, right?
Yep.
But then why the hell is it such a big deal? If everybody agrees with the definition and says, that's what I'm doing as a leader or want to do as a leader, why is that such a big topic, a big point of consternation in organizations across the board?
Because I think at the basis of it, it's human behavior. Because if you think about, let's break it down even more. Take it out of corporation, right? Take it out of business. And you and I have been on a very similar journey when it comes to weight loss, right?
Yes.
The first thing around weight loss, the first thing around getting healthy is, one, making the commitment that you're going to do it, and then actually doing the thing, right? And that's generally the hardest thing for anyone to do.
Doing the thing.
Right. I have a lot of people come up to me like, what'd you do? What'd you do? And I'm like, well, the first thing you gotta do is...
Well, tell them what you did.
Yeah, well, I woke up one day, July 22nd, after, many years of lots of frustration, and, my wife obviously gave me a lot of feedback around, getting healthy and getting myself better for myself and for the family and for the kids, and just generally being a better person in life, right? And that's because I was a a scholarship athlete, scholarship tennis player in college, and obviously, I was in shape at one point. So when life happened, as it always does, right? But I woke up one day, and but I want to say it wasn't just one day. It was a culmination of a bunch of different things, and it said, okay, this is it. I'm done, right? I got to do something. And quite frankly, it was you. It was seeing you, talking to you when you were pretty well into your journey.
March 14th, I started.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we were at a dinner, and a fundraiser, and I just was uncomfortable the entire time. It was because
I remember it.
I was overweight. I was making a bunch of excuses for it, and and a couple months later, I'm like, all right, I'm done, right? And that's when it happened. Like I went on Weight Watchers, for a few weeks, kind of sparked that because it's very restrictive in terms of diet, and then it started doing like a calories in, calories out counting. But what I did more than anything was committed myself to being active every single day, and that activity was really centered around this notion of rucking, putting weight on your back.
Yeah.
And people might think, oh, you just put weight on your back and that's it. And it's like, well, it's a little bit more of a difference. It's like this, you're breaking, if you think about walking or running, there's a comfort there. Like you're outside, you're running, it's your own body weight and whatever. But if you hold yourself down, right, if you put some weight on you, I'll get back to that in a second.
Makes it challenging.
I'll get back to that. I'll get back to that in a second when it comes to leadership. But you put some weight on you, put some challenge to you. It makes you uncomfortable, right? And it activates every muscle in your body, and therefore it then starts to shred your body. As long as you're combining it with diet, lifestyle, and making a commitment. And now I'm nuts when it comes to it, right? I mean, we talked earlier today. I was out for a walk. I try to go to 20,000 steps a day. I'm very disciplined about it. So much so.
And he was outside when we chatted
exactly,
on the phone today. For
exactly.
Sure.
And it's like that. But it's that notion, it's that repetition, it's that discipline now. And now it's in my brain where I can't even get out of routine because I have to be in that routine.
The habit's there.
If the habit's there, it's formed, it's done, right? But it's this notion of uncomfort. Rucking is an uncomfortable thing, but you get a sense of challenge and you get a sense of discipline. And you think about the people that, rucking is from the military, right?
Yep.
And you think about what people go through on those long rucks and so on and so forth, and it's like then you start to get in your brain this notion of discipline and I'm accomplishing something, and it's something that's not everyone's doing, right? I'm not crazy. I'm just not you. Like I'm just doing something a little bit differently, and it's working, right? And it works for a lot of people, and we can get off on rucking for hours, but when it comes to leadership, putting our organizations putting our organizations in a position that they can drive forward means you have to drive through adversity. And the only way you drive through adversity is through routine, meaning that your teams have got to be in a position where they can work through every single issue. And the only way they're going to be able to do that is like looking at you as a leader, as someone who's honed, who's disciplined, who's ready for that challenge. And the only way you do that is by engaging and having that discipline of engaging every day. And I think that when you make that mental shift as a leader to lean in, very similar to weight loss, once you make that mental shift to lean into your health, once you make that mental shift to lean into your organization, that's when things will take off, right? And you almost cannot not succeed, if that makes sense, because when you lean in and your people believe in you and you drive the right things, the organization is going to succeed. Same thing with you lean into your health. You lean into your health, you lean into doing the right things, you're ultimately going to succeed as long as you're disciplined about it.
So I get the personal discipline so that your team sees it. Mm-hmm. They see you as an example as a leader. And it's tough to talk to others. If you're a leader, and you're talking to others about the discipline of their job and you're showing non-discipline, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth.
Exactly.
And that's an issue with a lot of accountability talk that's out there. Mm-hmm. I'm going to hold you accountable, but yet I'm not holding myself accountable. That's an issue.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that's an issue.
And I'm smiling because you then triggered a memory in me, because I pushed my older son. He reminded me of this many times. to have discipline around training for baseball, right? And I made him a bet. I said, if you keep going at it, keep going at it, keep going at it, I will then correspondingly lose weight. That was 7 years ago. And he made the teams, he made varsity, he did all the stuff that he was supposed to do. He held himself accountable, and then he kept probing me and poking me over the years. And this last summer when he was home, it's like, Dad, come on, I mean, I'm still playing baseball, and you gotta hold up your end of the bargain.
Accountability works both ways.
Yeah, I mean, he held me accountable.
Yeah.
But to your point, you just triggered my memory. It's like I was expecting this heavy element of accountability in him, but I was not holding myself accountable for what I said I would do.
And therein lies, I think, the bigger problem, right? How often does that actually happen in the office? Think about in a corporate world where, as leaders, we're talking about, and the question I get is, how do I hold my team more accountable?
Right.
How do I get them to do what I want them to do? But is that a bigger issue based on this whole personal accountability thing that you're talking about?
Right.
How do you see that?
I see it as perfectly, it's a logical thing insofar as the fact that if you're a leader and you're saying, how do I hold my team accountable? You have to ask the first question, how am I holding myself accountable? Like, that should be the first question. Not how do I hold my team accountable? How do I hold myself accountable?
Am I holding myself accountable too?
Right.
Both of those,
exactly.
Right?
Am I laying out a very clear expectation? Am I laying out a clear plan? Am I getting the right team, together? Am I asking for feedback from the team on what they need to drive that thing, right? That you're asking them to do. If you're not doing any of that, but you're saying, well, how do I get my team accountable? Well, that's how you're going to get, that's why you're not holding your team accountable. It's because you're not leaning in. I've got this personal notion of, this personal philosophy of O squared, where O meaning opportunity and obligation, so O squared. As a leader, I have an opportunity and obligation every day to engage with my team to drive the organization, drive the business, drive the function, whatever, forward. And every day I have to take that principle to another level where I gotta have a conversation with somebody. I have to have a conversation and ask them for what do they need to do their job better, to achieve their goals. What's holding them back? And the list can go on and on and on, right? And sometimes leaders are not comfortable walking around, talking to their people, either virtually or physically.
Sit behind an office door, shut the door, and that's how they lead.
Right.
Which they're really not leading, by the way.
Right. But there's a lot of leaders that do that.
Yeah.
I would say that if you spend the majority of your time either physically in your office or mentally in your office, right, you're not necessarily leading, right? And you can be in your office and have virtual conversations. I'm not saying that you can't be in your office, but you got to put yourself out there, right? If you're in a customer-facing organization like we are you getting out into the plants, into the distribution centers, in with your customers, out on trucks? Are you doing these things to going and seeing what's going on in the organization and how the decisions that you may be making, depends on how high up you are. What are those things that you're doing as a leader that are affecting those people out in the field that you maybe don't see?
So let me play devil's advocate. Because this is what we do.
This is what
right?
we do,
Every time we talk, we play devil's advocate with each other, so we have these conversations. So I'm going to put it in the context of work now, and I'm going to say, hey, I'm a leader. I am doing what I'm supposed to at work. I'm holding myself accountable at work, but my team is still not doing their jobs. I need to figure out a way to hold them accountable.
Right.
So I'm going to ask myself, am I holding myself accountable? At work, I'm holding myself accountable.
Okay.
Where do I go from that?
Well, I think you got to then say, okay, at work, I'm holding myself accountable. Am I holding myself accountable in total, right?
What do you mean?
Meaning, if I look at the whole you, right? If I look at the whole you as a person at work, as a person outside of work, in total, are you holding yourself accountable as a whole, right? I've seen leaders where they're locked in at work, but they're a train wreck in their personal life, right? So they're not fully in it, right? So are you holding yourself accountable in total? And then I'll point at myself too. Like I could say throughout my career, I was holding myself accountable at work
Yeah.
perfectly, right? That's why I achieved the success I achieved. And as I wrote in I kept a journal throughout this whole thing. As I wrote in my journal, I said very specifically, I achieved some of the highest levels of success in my career. I've had my failures, but I've achieved success in my career. But I wasn't holding myself accountable in all facets of my life. And it was ruining it was ruining some aspect of my mentality or my focus, right? And your people see that. Your people see that, regardless of how well or not well you hold yourself accountable at work.
You can't hide.
No.
You can't hide.
No.
So even if you got your work side completely buttoned up, doesn't matter. Yeah. And I've done the same thing. Yeah. It's at some point or another as leaders, we've all done that. We got one side perfectly going, you've got the other side not perfectly going, and then you go have the conversation about trying to hold somebody else accountable, and they're looking at you going, "Well, get your crap together."
Yeah.
And maybe I'll listen to you.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that we all have to be like specimens, right?
Because we won't be.
You don't have to be the rock, right? Not every leader's got to be the rock.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is you got to put some stuff together that allows people to know that you got your stuff together, right? That you've got your act together as a person, as a leader, right? And that goes beyond corporations, politics, whatever, political office, leaders in the community, whatever. Look at some of the best leaders that we think are best leaders in the community, and then they fall apart.
Yeah.
Personally, that you lose all respect.
Credibility's out the window.
Out the window.
Politicians, we see that all the time, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, but we're flawed people, right? Yeah. We're flawed people. We're not saying that you can't make mistakes, but at the same time, you got to be able to say, okay, I'm holding myself accountable at work. Am I holding myself accountable in my behavior? I'm holding myself accountable broadly. But then again, also, at the end of the day, am I listening to my team? Am I listening to what the organization is telling me that we need in order to succeed? And that also can be, do I have the right team?
Of course.
I've asked people throughout my career, I'm like, if I gave you $1 million today, which is your budget, right? If I gave you $1 million today, and I said you could put the team together any way you wanted.
Is that the team?
Is this the team the way it's comprised today? Is this the team that you would have? Inevitably, no. Some semblance of it, yes, but inevitably, no. Okay, well, how do we get it there? Then that's where you have to take the next step. Because if you don't have the right team, if you look at, I hate to use all these analogies, but you look at football teams, right? I was at the Ohio State-Michigan game.
We were talking about that earlier. If anybody didn't watch the Ohio State-Michigan game, Ohio State lost. Everyone thought they were going to win. They thought they were going to win. And then there was a brawl at the end of the game. Yes. Just so if you're watching this later, that's what happened.
And there's 110,000 people in the stands that thought they would win too. And I happened to be at the game with my family. And, it was interesting because to me, that was the perfect example of lack of accountability of leadership. Because if you look at what happened in that game, and I am not by any means a football expert or a sports expert, I'm a leadership expert. Mm-hmm. But if you look at what happened in that game from a leadership perspective, the leaders on that team, and I'm not going to point to the head coach or the offensive coordinator or whoever, the leadership in general did not have the gumption to kick it up a notch, to hold themselves accountable for the expectations that were bestowed upon them because they were given all the money in the world to assemble a team that could do that thing, right? But they weren't able to do that thing. They may well do a lot of things this year. They've had some great success, but that one thing that Ohio State fans really hold dear is like they couldn't do that one thing because the leadership couldn't kick it up a notch and really take a risk and really hold themselves accountable for what it's going to take to do that thing and probably listen to their players and listen to other people around them. They had their mindset set about what they were going to do. And it played out exactly that way. I mean, they did the same thing over and over and over again with no success, and they wouldn't adjust, so they weren't
Same
listening.
play over and over and
Yeah,
over.
so they weren't
Yeah.
listening. So if you think about it from, I bet you like the coaches or whoever were saying, I'm holding myself accountable for what I said I would do. I'm doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. I held myself accountable, but you know what? I didn't pivot. I
That
didn't
was the
adjust.
wrong
And
accountability.
I wasn't listening to what was going on
Yeah.
on the field.
Yeah.
And I wasn't seeing what else was out there. Now, Michigan fans were fine with that.
Yes,
But
they were.
on the flip side of that, you flip it. You know, Michigan, you know, they have no five-star, basically no five-star recruits. They had two guys that are going to the NFL,
Yeah.
the two defensive linemen, but they did something. They had a plan. They stuck to that plan, but they pivoted and adjusted as they saw with what they had. They didn't have all the horsepower. They shouldn't have won that game, but they did because the other side, it was a true measure of leadership and a true lack of leadership in my estimation.
Detroit Lions, that same kind of thing. They won, but it's because the other team made a mistake, and the leader got fired as a result of that.
The ultimate accountability for that leader, again, very similarly.
So I like to put things kind of in practical steps, right? So number one around this whole accountability thing, look at yourself first. If your team's not accountable, look at yourself first.
Right.
And are you the example, at least to a certain extent, without no perfection,
Right.
progress, are you holding yourself accountable? Then you said a second thing. Do you have the right team? Which is also a leadership thing.
Right.
Because if you don't have the right team, that's a leader's responsibility to have the right team. But holding the wrong team accountable is kind of being cowardly.
Right. Right.
Because you haven't made the right decisions on the team.
Right. And do you have the right team? And also, are you doing the right things with that team? And again, same thing on, if I look at the Michigan-Ohio State game, Ohio State had the team. They just didn't do the right things with that team.
That was the leadership issue.
That was the leadership issue. Right.
Now let's assume you have the right team. Let's assume you've got that personal accountability, which is huge, and I don't think we talk about it enough in leadership circles. We just say, well, look, we got to hold our teams accountable. So we've already covered that. 2, you've got to have the right team. But let's still assume that those things are kind of happening. You've got the personal discipline, you've got the right team, but the team is still not completely there. The accountability is not there. What's the third step?
Yeah, I would say the third step is the leader really getting into it with that team. Right?
What do you mean?
Like to really getting into the mix with them. Meaning sometimes leaders, they say, okay, well, I assembled the team. I gave them the objectives. I've put together the structure, but now I'm going to go sit back and try to watch it happen.
Okay.
Right. And sometimes people falter or things don't move the way they're moving. But then they start complaining, or leaders meaning, they'll start saying, well, why aren't they doing it? I gave them everything they needed. Okay, well, now get into it. Now go into your team, get into the mix of it, and find out what's wrong, right? Meaning, again, use the sports analogy. If you got the right team, you've assembled everything, things are out there in the field working, I'm doing what I need to do, but things aren't working the way they should be working, okay? That leader should go into the huddle or go in and start talking to the team and say, what are we missing? What do we need to do to turn this thing around right now, right? And have the bravery to switch or to pivot and to maybe adjust what I thought I needed to do as a leader versus now what I need to do to really take it to a place that's going to succeed. Because too often leaders will say they have this, the notion of, I've committed down this path, and I'm going to stick on this path.
Because I made that commitment.
Because I made
no matter what happens.
Escalating commitment. That's what it is, right?
Yeah.
I've escalated. And that's exactly what happened this weekend. Like escalating commitment.
Yeah.
I'm going to continue down this path, but I'm not going to just, hey, let me go ask this person for their perspective. Let me go ask this individual for their feedback, and maybe how can we pivot? Let me go ask a customer. What are they receiving? What are they not receiving? Whether it's internal or external. We have a function like HR function, right? If things are not working, do I have the guts to go ask people
Why it's not working?
why it's not
Yeah.
working, right? Do I have, do
Well,
I have the ability to ask like ex-employees or ex-customers, why'd you leave us,
Yeah.
right? What can we do better?
Well, you're pointing something out that's incredibly important. It's not necessarily, at least I don't think it's necessarily just jumping in. I do think you got to get involved, but I don't think it's jumping in and then solving for the problem
no.
immediately. It's
Yeah.
guiding the team through
Right.
to take action to solve the problem,
Right.
not necessarily, and I use the term driving. It's not necessarily driving the pivot through, but guiding the team to take the pivot
Right.
through without making all the decisions yourself necessarily.
But
Now, there's a
being-
time you have to,
Right, but being willing to and having your team know that you're willing to pivot and adjust.
yeah.
Right. If they don't believe that you're able to pivot or adjust, they're not going to give you the
No,
feedback.
not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
And that's, you know,
One track mind. I'm
Right.
not going to go to him. I'm not going to go to her because it's not going to matter.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're not going to change. It doesn't really make a difference.
Exactly.
So the self-discipline, having the right team, and then being willing to pivot when things aren't going your way, because you're teaching your team at that point. This is what you do when things aren't working out exactly the way you want them to. This is how to prepare yourself to actually get there.
Right.
After that third step, is there a fourth step when it comes to really getting the team, getting the company, getting the organization to take accountability? Or does that wrap it up?
I think what sometimes we need to do, and sometimes it's easy to celebrate, right? This notion of celebration means like you've achieved your objectives and whatever. But I think if you look at every turnaround, I guarantee you, Dan Campbell, the Lions head coach, I guarantee you he didn't come in with expectations or setting a goal of, we're going to win the Super Bowl next year. I doubt that was it.
Probably not.
It was probably, let's get to over 500.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Let's do this.
Yeah.
Let's do
Incremental improvement.
incremental improvement, and
yeah.
then celebrate those improvements as they occur
Yeah.
in big ways, right? And also learn from your failures along the way too. And I think as long as you celebrate the wins, acknowledge the failures or the setbacks, but celebrating those wins along the way and setting goals and steps, that'll encourage more and more behavior, and you'll get people more confident. It's like, again, a guarantee. Dan Campbell's a perfect example of someone who's probably a phenomenal leader, and as I understand it, he's a player's coach. I mean, granted, he looks like he can still play, but at the end of the day, it's like he probably gets so celebratory over the things that he sets out as goals, and gets his team charged up, right? I mean, celebrating the kicker. I think it was a few games ago. I mean, it was a viral video where he gave the game ball to the kicker. I mean, and that kicker, I think wasn't he packing groceries or something not too long ago?
I don't know.
And I think all the kickers that were packing groceries not too long, and they all turn around. But I think that's where it's like, but celebrating that and celebrating those little wins builds up that camaraderie. And I think when you build up that camaraderie with that team and celebrate along the way, ultimately gets you to that big end point, right? Don't wait for the big end point, because you wait for the big end point, everyone's like, oh, there's all this work, and there's no acknowledgement until you get to that end.
So the point in this whole thing, though, is that accountability is often viewed as I got to do this to hold that person accountable, and it's viewed as a negative.
Right.
The things that you're talking about, or the things that we just had a conversation about, is they're not necessarily a bad thing.
No.
All of these are a positive, but if you're watching this and you're a leader, I mean, think about this for a second. If you're worried about holding your team accountable, start by looking in the mirror. Mm-hmm. And it's a realization that at least the two of us have kind of knew it. But in March for me, in June, July, whatever it was for you, it was like, okay, we had the corporate world buttoned up, but we sure as hell didn't have all the personal stuff buttoned up.
Right.
Has it made that big of a difference for you since you've been on your own journey, in your own leadership, career style, since you lost the 60 pounds or whatever you lost?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think what it's done, it's given me way more energy. I
got that.
Yeah,
I got that.
Way more energy. But it's a confidence. It's a confidence, but it's also like, I think people, whether it's whether it's it's direct or not, they view me a little bit differently. It's like I'm going to at least listen a little bit more intently because I know that they got their stuff together,
Yeah.
right? And I think that, but I also believe firmly because of the mental capacity I've increased in myself, because I think there's just something metabolically that happens to you. I mean, and all the research would show it. I'm not a doctor, nor do I pretend to be, but it's like I think as you lose weight, as you get more engaged from a physical perspective, and as you increase muscle and all that kind of stuff, it does something to your synapses and to your brain, the way you think through things. You're a little bit more clear. You're not as cloudy, and you definitely have a little wide an escalated amount of energy. Not like overpowering energy, but like an escalated amount of energy to like see things a little bit differently. So I think that I've been able to more clearly articulate my vision and my expectation, not only for myself, but my team, and be able to correlate the two. And I've done it in town halls, I've done it in leadership meetings, and and people have asked, what have I learned along the way? And I've told them what I've learned is the importance of a more well-rounded you. And I've, hindsight's 2020. I should have been listening to my wife for the last 20 years.
Now, we're not telling you to go out there and lose weight. That's not the purpose of this whole thing.
No, it's not.
But think about it. Again, it's kind of like looking in the mirror, and do you have the accountability in your own life when you're talking to somebody else about holding them accountable,
right,
and not talking about both sides of your mouth, right? Somebody taught me this a long time ago, in kind of the 4 key areas of like body, being, balance, business. Those were the 4 areas, right? And if you've got some level of accountability, personal discipline in all those, you've got a lot more credibility when teaching discipline to other people, because people will actually follow you.
Yeah.
Right. So don't take that too far, right? When it comes to just body is one of those things.
Right.
There's a lot of other areas that you can focus on as well.
Absolutely.
But Jason, thanks for this issue of accountability. Thank you for talking about it, especially from your own perspective.
Yep.
And your own experience that you've gone through this year, which I think is important. But for, again, everybody that's actually watching this thing, if you're struggling with accountability, look in the mirror first. Yep. Pay attention to what's going on with you before you're worried about everybody else that's on your team. And then look at the team itself. Have you assembled the right team? Have you given them the tools? Because that's a leadership thing as well. And then are you actually leaning in, as you were talking about it, the O squared?
Right.
Opportunity and
obligation yep,
to actually do that. And then the 4th piece, the last one that we talked about, that you mentioned.
Celebrate.
Is celebrate.
The little steps.
The little steps.
Yep.
You do that, and then this whole idea of accountability becomes more of a positive thing than a negative thing. But take accountability yourself first.
Absolutely.
Thanks again.
Appreciate it.
It's been another Leadership Live. Thank you for paying attention. Thank you for tuning in the first place. Again, the idea is to talk about all of these leadership things in a way that's different than what you're going to see anywhere else. We just want to give you a different perspective. If you've got a topic that you want us to talk about, if you want to come on the show and you actually want to talk about it, let us know. Reach out to us online. Feel free to go ahead and send me an email as well. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, Facebook. The email is steve@loisleadershipinstitute.com, steve@loisleadershipinstitute.com. You can also text me at 734-837-8500. And stay tuned for a future episode, because Jason's going to come back on another time. We've got another topic. What does a CEO really need from their CHRO? That's going to be another one that's going to be cool to watch. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.